it's already quite a difficult question to start with. But to answer it in one word, the most important aspect might be diversity. I think what characterizes European ESE research is a big diversity in terms of the topics that are being addressed, also the empirical settings that are being studied, theoretical traditions in ESE research, and also methodological approaches. So yeah, what really characterizes it is maybe not like one specific thing, but precisely the diversity over all these different items. And this is actually also maybe illustrated by how this environmental and sustainability education research network of the ESER conference is described on the website, where reference is made, for instance, to different approaches to the role and purpose of education. For instance, they mention the difference between addressing the role and purpose of ESE in terms of an instrument to make our society more sustainable, or otherwise as an end in itself, you could say, where the development of individuals is put at the forefront. And I think this is really something that characterizes ESE research, that you have these diversity of approaches. It's maybe not even one or the other, it's probably a bit more nuanced and less dualistic than that, but the diversity of approaches to the role of education. Maybe also characteristic is that ESE is definitely not only considered as a cognitive practice, or education as something that is merely cognitive, rational, but that there's also a lot of attention for ethical aspects, political aspects, lately also very much focus on emotional aspects, existential dimension of sustainability education. So the more than cognitive is also characteristic and also part of this diversity, like a wide look at educational practices. And then when it comes to more like research approaches, I think a lot of work has been done on measuring educational effectiveness, like measuring learning outcomes, competencies in relation to sustainability issues. But on the other hand, also a lot of work that is more like in the field of didactics. And then maybe most of all, like the continental didactic tradition, where it's less focused on effective instruction, but more maybe in line with an approach that does not see the purpose of ESE as an instrument for a more sustainable society. I think a lot of work has also been done from the perspective of educational theory or philosophy of education. Especially recently in that subfield, more and more attention has also been paid to sustainability issues and sustainability education. And also recently, a field outside educational research, being sustainability transition studies, also starts to pay more and more attention to education. And there, of course, we have, again, a little bit of another research tradition where education is maybe most of the time approached as or learning as a means to achieve this more sustainable society. So yeah, that were a couple of things that I was thinking of in relation to what would characterize European ESE research. To position myself in this diversity of approaches, maybe one way to do so would be by emphasizing that I'm not so much looking at what works, but rather at how things work. That's what I always find most interesting, not really defining in advance what sort of learning outcomes we want to achieve and then just evaluating or testing whether the students have achieved these, but more looking into practices in a lot of detail and then see what is learned and how it is learned without necessarily predetermining what it should be. And related to that, I also really focus a lot on teaching practices, because learning is one thing, but what facilitates learning or what makes it possible and influences it is, of course, the actions of the teachers. And therefore, I'm quite happy that we have now recently joined forces with some researchers from different countries, different universities in what we call TAPLab, the Laboratory for Teaching Practices, based in Uppsala University, but also with researchers from Ghent University, Stockholm, Malmö. Some German colleagues have also recently joined in. And we focus very much on the study of teaching practices, like really investigating, often with empirical observations, what teachers do and preparing their lessons, but also in performing the lessons, and how this influences students' learning. So that's very much our focus. Therefore, we use mainly or almost exclusively qualitative research methods. And there I have actually been very much inspired by work done in Sweden by the former research group SMET, out of which the STEP Lab actually evolved. SMET meant studies of meaning making and educational discourse, and it was existing in Uppsala as well as in Örebro University. And the people involved in SMET have actually made a lot of efforts to develop analytical methods and analytical models that, for me at least, are very helpful to increase the rigor of qualitative research and to help us to open up the black box of what's happening in educational practices, what people learn there, and especially also how this is made possible by the actions of the teachers. Then theoretically, I think I would say that I position myself in the position of pragmatism as a philosophical thinking tradition, a bit also inspired by the work done in this SMET research group, but also, of course, by theoretical work that comes a bit from outside environmental and sustainability education research, but more like educational theory in general. And I really find it important in the research that we do at our center also, for instance, to combine a strong theoretical underpinning. Often it comes from pragmatist theory, but not always, with empirical work that is done with appropriate methods. So that's, I hope it characterizes what we do, but at least I can say that it's the ambition to make that happen in our research. When it comes then to the role of education in relation to a more sustainable society, I think I'm very much into a non-dualistic approach to this tension between, on the one hand, education as an instrument, and on the other hand, education as having intrinsic value in itself. I always find it quite important to not only focus on the individual, to take these huge societal challenges that we have into account, but also to try to reveal the unique value of education in addressing them. Because I think that's something that we are, that we can do as educational researchers, and that I find quite striking when we look at how decisions are made in society, for instance, when it comes to sustainability. Educative spaces in schools, but I believe we can also create educative spaces outside schools, have something to offer that is quite unique. And one of my doctoral students, Maarten de Leijen, has actually described it one day as not so much looking at education from the demand side, like what can education do for society, but from the supply side. What does education or educative spaces have to offer that no one else in education can offer? And that's like a time and space to take some distance, to study things, to reflect upon things. And that is what happens ideally in schools and in universities. But I think it's also really interesting to look for instances where it happens also outside formal educational settings. So this focus on the very specific role that education can play in relation to societal transformations is also something that characterizes my research, definitely. And also a recent big project on learning in view of sustainability transitions is one example of that. And a quite difficult question, especially since when you are asked about key publications, it's always easy to forget some and to irritate people or to not recognize the value of certain publications and authors. So maybe the best way to do is to do this is to mention a publication that has been very key in my own development as a researcher, very influential for my own work. And it was actually a publication that I discovered quite at the start of my own PhD research. And it was a special issue on environmental and sustainability education in Sweden and Denmark. It was edited by Johan Öhman and Jeppe Lesse, who have been in this field since very long, doing interesting work. And what was specifically interesting for me was not only the regional focus of that special issue, but also the topic that was in focus, which was values and democracy. So this aligned very well with my interest in the relation between ESE and societal change. It's very much also a democratic issue that has a lot to do with values. And when I was at the beginning of my PhD research, I was very much struggling with these issues. Also, since I worked those days as a policy advisor of the Flemish government, so we were preparing the Belgian or Flemish policy on ESE, but also developing capacity building initiatives for practitioners. And many of them were struggling with this value dimension and with questions, for instance, on can we use education as an instrument, or does this entail a risk of indoctrination, and how should I position myself as a teacher? Can I show my own values or not? That were questions that were very, very prominently present in practice. And in this special issue, I found a lot of answers, or at least the beginning of answers on what research had to say about that, and also how I could take inspiration from that in my own research. One of the articles, for instance, was also from Leif Östman, who explained also practical epistemology analysis and all that sort of analytical methods and models that I found so important to use later on. There were articles on teachers' moves to support students' learning. There was also an article discussing the so-called action competence approach in sustainability education. A couple of years after the first articles have been published on that topic, and that also aligned well with a very topical discussion about how to frame education in terms of competencies, which is quite narrow, and I was looking for a more wider view on that. So yeah, and that special issue, I found a lot of inspiration that influenced my own research until today. And I also still use many of them when I'm in my current work to address these topics. Of course, a lot has happened since, because it was published in 2010. But yeah, for me, it was a key publication. And of course, there are still many more, but I think I will just focus on this one for now.